Hello? So no pressure here. I've got two operators that are all about cost, and I've got a designer that takes 9 years to design a hotel, and but still has a very good handle on cost, obviously. And thank you, Tony. Between you and Bruce Ramus, you guys are a difficult act to follow for sure. So I think Tony needs no introduction, but I think looking at his website, and certainly after seeing a really impressive presentation from Tony, I just took a couple of things off his website. On his the first page, he says, "We offer a bespoke, hands-on approach to every project that's driven by high-quality design and continuous innovation." And I think for food and beverage, innovation is really key to the space. There is so much out there. It's something that we do every single day of our lives, whether we like it or not. Sometimes we eat a little bit more than we should. But again, with Tony's notes here, he said, "We don't want to show you what we do, we just simply do it, turning the ordinary, extraordinary, and the past into the present, and the present into possibilities. Through a streamlined process with emphasis on heritage, hospitality, artistry, and origins, do we build business models for culture, rethinking the industry format, which is key for the F&B space at the moment, given the costs that we have of building, the costs of staff, and for Tony in creating future spaces and solutions that transform lives." I think it's pretty clear on what we're trying to do in the F&B space. With Sven, I didn't know much about Sven until I did some Googling last week, and we went to his restaurant here last night in Melbourne with a group of the speakers, which was a fantastic experience, and I thank you very much for that. And I think it's definitely worth having a look. The food was fantastic. Certainly the atmosphere was very unique, with the waitress coming around showing us about 20 knives, asking us to choose our weapons. So but it's certainly a unique experience, and I think some of this, the discussion today with the memorable experience, last night was certainly a memorable experience for the 15 or so of us that were hosted by Shape last night.
Thank you.
And then we have Nicholas Kalogeropoulos, who has I won't say a checkered history, but has been around the traps for more than 30 years, as long as I have. I think he looks a little bit younger than I do. But his background includes GM of F&B at Village Cinemas Australia, and also GM of the Assoyne Club here in Melbourne, which is a specific area or club for barristers and judges here in Melbourne. He's the founder and director of Calibre Feasts. They look after a boutique events company looking after a lot of footballers. They also have a new development up in the Yarra Valley with a winery, and I think that in itself has a few challenges, and it certainly looks like a really great project. And he's after an interior designer as well. So with the restaurant business, it's certainly not for the faint of heart or the stomach. The restaurants have a high failure rate. Around 60% at last count of new restaurants fail within the first year. And nearly 80% shut their doors before their 5th anniversary. So it is a hard yakka. And those of you who've worked in the industry, as these guys can attest to, it's a lot of hours and tough conditions. Often the reason is simply location, some overcapitalising. We've all seen it before with multi-million-dollar fit-outs in the wrong location, and they fail very quickly. But of course now they're failing even quicker because of the click of a button and social media and the swipe. You know, we don't, as an operator, you don't get much of a chance. The first impressions may not be great. You know, you double the staff on your opening weeks and what have you, and you still don't get any great press, and you don't get any great things on social media, and it is a really hard slog for the first little while. But saying that, there's still a raft of growing operators that continue to challenge those statistics. As an example, there was a media release today. Rockpool Dining has signed 15 leases in the last 90 days. And that is an amazing figure for what started out as a one restaurant operation. And I think we'll be talking with Sven a little bit later on about, and Nick also about, you know, their future and how they have to expand. Of course, there's always with dining, there's that memorable time when everything clicks: the arrival, the atmosphere, the service, the food, and where the design doesn't distract from the food or conversation. Is key to create an environment that remains fresh and not a one-hit wonder when you enter and think, wow, but you're not really interested in coming back. And again, it gets back to Tony's point in his presentation about this timeless design, and the fact that actually you want places to look better as they age. A bit like us, Tony.
Thank you. More you than me.
But I think also now we're seeing, certainly in Australia, that there's a trend to developer designing neighbourhoods, as Tony again was mentioning in his presentation, that incorporate restaurants and community spaces into the development. A classic one that I worked on a couple of years ago with Toga or TFE Hotels was the Boheme development on the old Hakoah site in Bondi, where there is about 12 food outlets, 50 apartments and a 106-room Adina apartment hotel. So there, in that development, there's Bill's, Morris Tazzini's Pizza Dorazio, Tavola and Messina Gelata, to name a few. And to this date, and I think it's about 5 years old now, is really one of the most successful developments in Sydney. So how to design a space when we are so inundated with choice? So the million-dollar question: what are the keys to successful F&B design? Tony, I'm going to start with you.
Well, ownership, accountability, the understanding of restaurant business versus the business of a restaurant. There is two parts, and they are directly related. Then, of course, with the full understanding of human behavior, typically, any time of the week, you will say, honey, what do you want to eat tonight? What do you want to eat tonight? Or you may say, on the weekend, where do you want to go? So there's a twofold to this. So to be a great, successful restaurant, you need to have both.
Yeah. Sven?
Yeah, for me, what's important is to consider function first. So, you know, look at how the restaurant's going to operate, where the bar's going to be, how to avoid bottlenecks, how to optimize the layout for profitability, for bumps on seats, so you can make the coin. And once you have all the functions sorted out, then you can go about making it all pretty. But certainly don't start the other way first. A lot of bars and a lot of restaurants I've been consulting to or working in, they look fantastic, but they're built in with that many issues that it's near impossible to make profit, simply because the pretty design came before the functional layout. And I think that's super important with bars and restaurants.
Yeah. Nicholas?
Mine's a little bit different. Mine was more needs-based. An example would be when I started at the Essine Club, we had an issue where the old club was very, very male-dominated, very, very boysy, leather chairs, dark curtains and so forth, and we had to design a space on level 1 which tackled all our gender equality issues. There was a lot more women coming to the bar, there was a lot more female judges, and there's a real misconception as well that there's a lot of barristers make a lot of money. A lot of them do, but a lot of them don't. So we had to employ designers to assist us in not only building a space for us which managed the gender equality, to make sure that it was welcoming, had a lot of natural light, wasn't gender specific in any way, but also financial demographics as well. So there was a lot of barristers who couldn't afford the more expensive dining options, so we had to create a 100-seat cafe, 100-seat dining room, so that way we managed to suit all our members and increased our trade down significantly.
Yeah, okay. So, Tony, going back on to design, how do we design a space that captures so many different elements? You've got the arrival and departure, you've got, you know, what I guess the buzzwords these days is the whole guest experience. You know, everybody these days is talking about the guest experience, which, you know, when I started work in this business 30 years ago, the guest was never taken into account. Now, these days, the guest is number one, and they should be too, because they're the ones that pay the bills, and they're the ones that you're paying your salary and keeping you living in Argentina rather than working. But how do you go about that design's sustainability and layout?
First of all, I think just a counterpart on the your part. Sure, then we always understand the form follows the function. The function absolutely is a must. I mentioned what is important is the product. If you have nothing to offer, why are you opening a restaurant? So I think people, we are the consumer. There's a trade that I'm willing to buy a product or a service, and that has certain value. But that value sometimes is expected. So we, of course, designer then create this sort of unexpected value, right? The surprise. What should that be? And I think up to a lot of designers, and I say this honestly, I don't like design. I just think design is too self-centered. I think design should not be so visible. I don't think design should be too loud. I think there are certain things that should be well in the background. So what is it about? Fundamentally, it's about people and the product. It really that boils down to that. Now, of course, today, expectation is a lot different. When people say, where do you want to go on the Friday night? I mean, maybe the compromise is to forget the food. I just go someplace have fun. But that shouldn't happen. It really shouldn't happen. You should say, why do we want to compromise that? Well, I mean, we consumer, we allow that to happen. And we have no one else to blame but yourself, right? So to be successful, is it short term or is it long term? The long term has become harder and harder because the rising of the real estate cost. I mean, more or less, if you are successful, your landlord want to be part of it. And then your staff want to be part of it. The whole world want to be part of it, right? Now, if you become too noticeable, then the whole world want to be on your case. So at the end, the short-term success. The short term really is all come down to the OPM, other people's money. And there's more and more deal based on OPM. So the people that used to be in the restaurant business, now they are in the business of a restaurant, right? So as an operator, and they have other people put their money up front, and of course, certain returns expected, and so on and so forth. So I think the dynamics certainly change. Now, to be sustainable, my take, really is if you truly passionate, love what you do, and you do it in the public domain, you must own the real estate. And I think I mentioned earlier, I love my studio because we own it. So no landlord say your lease is up, time to move. It allows me to accumulate all the soul that I need to be sustainable. Right? But if you don't own it, then you're gonna need the interior designer to do the quick makeup to make it look good, right? But the question is, you have to remove the makeup when you go to sleep. So I wonder what the restaurant is gonna look like at night after you close. So these are the things that I believe in. So I think great success really is about not necessarily have the greed. The greed part oftentimes kills the restaurant. The cost factor, menu structure. I have been to great restaurants, look at the menus, I don't know what to eat. Or I go to many restaurants and say, oh, look at this menu, I want to eat everything. But there's a fair trade-off where I like to pay more, where I can pay less. All can happen on one menu. So if I can return to a restaurant once a week or perhaps twice a week, I would consider that restaurant can be around for a long time, assuming if they can own the real estate.
Sven?
I can't remember the question at this point, bro.
No, it's more about, I think, going on from Tony's point about owning the restaurant as against given the real estate prices
I'd say,
in Sydney and Melbourne.
Those are different things, right? The minute you own the real estate, and I'd say in Sydney or Melbourne, you're more of a developer, a property developer than you are a restaurateur. The amount of money that it would cost me to buy one of my spaces and own it outright, I can probably open 10 restaurants for the same price and own the business in it, and my return on the business is going to be way higher than the return on the land itself. So I don't own any of my premises for that reason. I can get a 20-year lease and operate within it, and if my business is still rocking and rolling, and we're still high-fiving and fist-pumping 20 years later. Hopefully we'll get an extension on that lease. Obviously, if you are in the financial position where you can own the real estate, that is great. But you are in a different game then. You have a lot of money sunk into that particular asset, and you are growing the value of property. You're not growing the value of your F&B offering. You're growing the value of that physical land. I'm not a real estate person. I like booze. I like food. I like putting smiles on people's faces. I like getting naked and party. And so, therefore, I'm sticking to not in the venue, not while we're open. And that's why I prefer sticking to the F&B side. And you can cash flow that more easily. Real estate right now is, hideously expensive, and it's a different industry to me. I see that as property investing, not F&B.
Yeah. Nicholas, and I think for you, you're working in the event space, so the event space you're working in is stadiums and what have you, where you can't own the space. So how does it go for you for leases?
Well, it's exactly as Tony said. Our leases are very, very much structured like retail environments. We have a base rent, and then as soon as we hit the threshold, the landlord wants a piece of the action as well. So they either take 5% or 10% or what have you. They do come to the party a lot though. They do assist with fit out, they do assist with marketing, but a lot of the times, as soon as you are successful, then they're putting their hand up. That's why we're very, very excited about the Yarra Valley project, where we just own the leasehold, and whatever money we make, it's on a fixed rent, which means our rental as a percentage of turnover can come down, which is where we start making a little bit more money.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, I mean, I refuse. So the first conversation I have with any landlord is, do you want turnover rent? In that case, you can. I'm not having the conversation. It's a very quick one to have. Going on a fixed rent is what I always do. I try to keep my rent below 5% of turnover. That allows me to invest in my staff. It allows me to invest in other weird shit that makes a great fun experience. And I think that's super important. Like today, keeping rent low is becoming more and more important because wage cost is getting so high. And you really, if you want to have a sustainable restaurant or bar, if you start skimping on staff costs, it doesn't matter how much you spent on the chandeliers, man, or the rest of the look. You gotta have good stuff in your business. That's the #1 asset to invest in. I would rather have people sitting on cardboard boxes and be served by the best bar staff and the best sums in the world than have a fancy fit out and crap staff. And that's why the rent needs to be as low as you can. Same thing you can't skimp on the cost of goods either. So, it costs a certain amount of money to put great drinks and great food on the table. And guests will notice if you skimp on that. So for me, the rent is where I fucking fight, and I'll properly fight on the rent. I do not want the landlord to put their hand up. If the landlord pays me for the full fucking fit out and my time and gives me massages and is my fucking driver, fuck it, sure, you can have turnover rent. But if you don't do all that shit, it's not happening. Sorry about the swearing, by the way. I learned English I'm from Norway. I learned English with Eddie Murphy. I can't get rid of the swearing. It's fucking there. It's just ingrained. So yeah, I thought I'd let you know.
Thanks, Ben. Nicholas, how do you make it an ongoing, memorable experience for your customers? And you do a lot of event space. You're about to get into the smaller boutique accommodation and sort of wedding event space up in the Yarra eventually. How do you make an ongoing, memorable experience for your customers? Because at the end of the day, they're going to the footy or afterwards. How do you make that?
Well, it's difficult. At Amy Park, where we have the cafe there, it's always difficult because the transaction is quite short. So the memorable experience there is how do we engage them, how do we serve them faster so they keep coming back, and then on the occasion, how do we wrangle one of the teams to get a player in there as well so they can sign some autographs and, slap some hands with some players. In other areas that we've worked in, we've had to keep on reinventing ourselves. I mean, obviously the Yarra Valley hasn't opened yet, but we're looking at obviously innovation out there. Out there, it's very, very much about the area that you're in. I mean, the design that we're looking at there is how do we bring the outdoors in? How do we make it a memorable experience where you've driven 1 hour, but you know that I'm in the Yarra Valley. I mean, I've been to some venues out in Mornington Peninsula and Yarra Valley, and you sit there and you could be anywhere in the world. So what's the point of buying property all the way out there? Other areas that we've looked at, I suppose one of the key examples of creating a memorable experience was when we were with Village. That was a key moment for us because I'm sure you're all aware of the Gold Class Cinemas recliner chair. By the time we looked at it back in 2008, the chair had its day as the hero. So we were looking at how do we reinvent the cinematic experience. So we looked long and hard, and we had lounges where people used to arrive and they were gaudy and they were tacky and they were velvety and they were crap. So we thought, how do we make it more engaging? You know, we talk about engaging. So we started redesigning all our lounges, and we started spending a lot of money. We got some good designers in who made them all like funky, looking like bars, played some cool music and so forth. And then when we talk about functionality with design and operations, we then retrained all our staff to try to get people to arrive 1 hour earlier. So that way we started having in-lounge dining, then we started having in-lounge drinking, and of course all design needs to lead to financial benefit as well. So through that, we started turning over more revenue. But then we wanted to take it further, and we thought, how do we interact with those cinema goers? I mean, people were having home theatres at home, they were having recliner lounges at home, they could drink whatever they want. So we thought, okay, how do we break down the fourth wall? The fourth wall is, how do we get the people to engage with what's up on screen? Because the only uncontrollable that we had was the product on the screen. And ultimately, I didn't really care whether people enjoyed the movie they watched. I wanted them to enjoy the Gold Class experience. And to me, it's 4 elements. It's food, beverage, service, and ambience. So what we looked at then, we thought, okay, how do we take it to the next level? So when people were in theatre, we aligned ourselves with certain movies. And there was one about Julia Childs who wrote a cookbook and so forth. But people always get hungry when they watch movies. So there's a couple of scenes in the movie whereby as soon as she was eating, say, a beef bourguignon in the movie, we would serve the whole theatre beef bourguignon. And then when she was eating lemon tart, everybody in the theatre had lemon tart. So it was that real memorable experience which covered all senses, which is what we were chasing. And then we try to encourage people to sit in the lounges after they came out of the cinema. And this was breaking new ground because people sort of leave a cinema and they head straight for the door. And then we had to change the staff and say, well, like, instead of asking them, did you enjoy the movie, which I really didn't care about, did you enjoy the Gold Class experience? And little things like that, the service, the food, the beverage, that increased our average spend per person by $3.50. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're turning over 2 million patrons in Gold Class a year, that is huge. So just constant innovation and thinking outside the square.
Okay. Sven?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you just said there. I think the key here is, considering how can you exceed expectations. And it sounds like quite an easy throwaway line, but if you sit down and look at the very basics of operation, because every venue is going to be different, right? And a memorable experience is just one that exceeded expectation. If you just provide what I expect when I walk in there, you can be, if I'm expecting fucking amazing and you provide amazing, it's still not memorable because it is what I came in expecting, right?
And you'll get crucified on Instagram.
Or you get fucked if you don't meet the expectation. So you got to exceed that expectation. And then it's quite interesting when you look at how to do that. Like we've done it. We got a bar in Melbourne called Boilermaker House. It's a whiskey and craft beer bar. And so you go, how do I exceed expectations when I pour people whiskey? Like one of the things I love about owning cocktail bars, I got a few cocktail bars, and with cocktails you can fucking turn on the show and you can really blow people away, and people go, whoa. People take photos and Instagram the hell out of cocktails. They don't Instagram beer. Like, it's just not done. Look at this fucking amazing head on my beer. So, it's difficult to blow people away. So, say at Boilermaker House, one of the things we did, we put 1,000 malt whiskies on the back bar. So that one way of exceeding expectation is just to give them a ton of fucking choice. They walk in, they're like, oh my God. And they may not drink the $600 a nip whiskey that we have there. They might just drink the $12 one, but they're still kind of going, wow, this is great. And then we distill our own water in the venue. So all the water that you get with your whiskey, we distill like you distill a whiskey, so it's nice and pure. And we have proper glassware that comes with it, and we have proper service around it. So people, when they drink a whiskey there, they have a slightly different experience to what they expect when they normally get a whiskey. And then you got to look at that every aspect of your business and go, how do I exceed expectation? At Mjölner recently, which is my Viking-inspired restaurant, and too much to go into detail, but one of the things we do there is birthdays. Birthdays can be a bit of a headache for bars and restaurants. Like, I fucking hate people bringing cake, you know? It's messy, fucking dirts up the table. There's no revenue in it for me. I feel like a dick charging you cake fee. So how do I turn this thing into something where I can exceed your expectations? So what we do now is, if you come to the venue, when you book online, we know it's your birthday. You're probably just lying because to get special treatment, but fuck it, you know, we'll cop it. And so we made these beautiful cards up that say Mjölner on the front. You open it up, and it's a Viking-inspired place. It's got two Vikings toasting, and so it will pop up inside. Rawr, you know, skål, it says, which is the Norwegian for cheers. And then all the staff sign it and wish you happy birthday. We do the same if it's your anniversary. But then we give you a little present. So you get a little box with a little glass horn that you have on arrival. When you come in, we give you a free shot on arrival. It's another way of exceeding expectation. And people are kind of friendlier when they're boozed up as well, so it works that way too. And having an actual birthday present that you take home is exceeding expectation, right? And you remember that. And as soon as we put the little birthday card in, the little gift in, it doesn't cost me any more than giving you a free glass of champagne, and you expected a free glass of champagne. You expected me to do something for it because it's your birthday, right? But you didn't expect a take-home gift. So I think that memorable experience is just about drilling down into detail of what you do, and then picking places where you go, how do I do better than what they came here for, and how do I do better than what they want? Yeah. And that's what makes it memorable. Yeah. Or you can get nude.
I think there's some really good points there, Tony. I think from a design point of view, you know, how do you pick up on those maybe eye-catching moments, like the quirky bathroom, or, you know, all of the curation, as you were saying before, of the space, which is so important in many places, and it's the thing that gives the place some soul, apart from the noise and you know, the noise of dining, I guess.
Well, I have a very different take. I just think memorable moment cannot be fabricated, and I think usually happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. However, when you go out, you do have to have certain expectation. What memory do you want to have? I'll give you one example. Of course, we all know Mies van der Rohe designed the building in New York, the Seagram building on 53rd and Park Avenue 75 years ago. Philip Johnson designed his first restaurant on the ground floor called the Four Seasons. And last year, they suffered closed down. A restaurant that's been there for 75 years. Many of us do celebrate there from time to time. We did our Christmas party there every year. And that's an experience that we're looking for. The same people, the same time next year. The service is nostalgic, quite nostalgic. They haven't changed the menu since 75 years ago. So there are certain things that we kind of expect. But what you don't expect is the Mother Nature, right? The Mother Nature sometimes does wonder. And I mentioned to some fella yesterday that, you know, I live on the top floor of the building, and I find watching snow falling is quite spectacular in New York. So I put some uplight outside of my garden, and the neighbor fought me about it, and then that took me a long time to get the approval. But the purpose of that is to create those unexpected, memorable moments. Yeah. You know, when the snow falling, I say, hey, everybody come and see, or the family, that is. Then we can sit there having a dinner, and you will never forget that dinner, right? Because we didn't expect snow to fall. Yeah. Right? So these are the things I believe memorable experiences somehow you can fabricate. But you must create the opportunity. If it does happen, definitely memorable.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. How do you work with your designers to come up with the brief and the key objectives? Like, is one of the most difficult things to do as a client is to brief the designer on exactly what you want? I'm
happy to go there. I'm a nightmare to work with. So I'm happy to lay that out there. I'm an owner operator, so when I come up with a concept, it's, you know, if I'm going to put my money and my house on the line for something, right? I like to be in control of what that is going to be. So when I mean, the last design brief I wrote was 45 pages long. And it came with every single table I wanted. It came with every chair I wanted. It came with everything put where I wanted it to be. I had the floor plan ready, and I had everything costed down to the dollar that I wanted it to have. And the reason I work the way I work is that when I come up with a concept, I believe the concept needs to be super, super tight. You know, I need to know what I'm serving in there, how many people I can fit in there, where my function spaces are, how many, you know, what kind of groups I'm going to be able to put in there. Are there groups of 20? Are there groups of 40? Am I catering to couples? Am I catering to families? And like I said, function before the fancy stuff. So I do all of that. And I think that's important. It gives the designer and me a greater chance to meet on something. Not everybody wants to work with a brief that's that detailed, because they come to me and go, well, what's left for me to do? And I'm like, well, you know, you make it look pretty. But I do think for me, like, when we've got a good relationship, it comes down to a really, really concise brief and concept, and being clear on what you want from the designer. I know there's a lot of people out there who just go, I just want to open a restaurant, and they let the design team create the brand, come up with a style of cuisine, create the wine menu, and everything comes from that's not me, right? Because I'm an operator, and when I have a concept,
but also
it's tight.
you go that way, you also have enormous cost issues if you start letting some of the designers where they don't have a lot of F&B experience. Even if they do have a lot of F&B experience, they don't have their house on the line.
Well, that's exactly right. So I want to have my money back in 18 months. At the latest, you know. So if it costs me $1 million to open it, you know, I need to be knowing that I can make $1 million a year profit at least. Otherwise, I'm not going to play ball. But for me, that's the key thing for me working with the design team, is to have a really, really solid and tight concept, and have worked through all those things before I go and see a designer, because that way we can turn it around quickly.
Yeah. Nicholas?
That's very thorough. I like that. I'm a bit different. I want to be told what I don't know. I liken design almost like to somebody who comes to me and wants me to plan their wedding for them. They come with a vision, and it's up to me to turn it into a reality. They don't have all the answers, but I will show them ways of planning their wedding and running their event that they would never have thought of. So when I consider the Yarra Valley, I've got ideas as to how I want it. It's got to transgress demographic. It's got to be approachable to everybody. It's got to be there for kids, older people, younger people, people who don't have money, people who have a lot of money, and so forth. People who want weddings and so forth. I know what I want, and I know that I want to maximise the views. And you know, Tony talked about Mother Nature. I mean, you know, 4 seasons out in the valley. I mean, there is no better landscape to look at out through the window. So I want a designer to come to me and say, you know what, I've taken everything that you have, and this is what I've got. Because otherwise, I mean, I've done it in the past, and you know, I've cut out things and I've shown things, and then at the end of the day, the final brief is exactly what I cut out of a magazine that I found or I found on a website. So when does a designer become like a drawer or a draftsperson or a carpenter instead of somebody that I'm employing for their intellectual skill?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, some really good points there. So with the operational side, so Tony, you touched before on open kitchens or kitchens behind closed doors. As a designer, it is a difficult proposition because you've got finishes in there, you've got a lot of cold finishes, stainless steel, but also you've got the staff on view. And is it all about the theatre?
No, not at all. I never looked at restaurants should be theatrical. I never believe restaurants should be themed. I believe the fundamental. I'm there to eat and creating an experience of my own. Why open kitchen, or you call it show kitchen? I think for several reasons. If a proprietor is a part of that kitchen control, therefore I think the kitchen should be open. It is a part of the front and the back. And reality is there is no front and there is no back. And I think how you control the visual movement, I think that's what designers should do. Okay? I mean, for example, if you say, well, you create an alley kitchen, linear kitchen. So you see people moving in a linear format. Somehow you get sort of a motion sickness to a certain degree, right? But if people moving in certain motion, I think it can be visually pleasing. Then you can see people working in such a way. It's an art form. I mean, of course, there are some chefs throwing pots and pans that you don't want to see, but that shouldn't happen regardless. Now, of course, the synergy between the server and the kitchen, to me, I think they're partners. You know, we have server say, well, I deliver the food. I don't know what's in it. My opinion, it shouldn't be there. You know, I mean, 4 o'clock every day before the meal is served, staff's being well briefed. What's in it, what they should have, etc. You know, so I think, I talk about invisible design when it comes to restaurant. I think it's a part of our everyday life. Some restaurant has a different rhythm than other. And I, as a customer, I can choose. I can choose what I want, what to eat, when to eat, and what price range I want to pay. Then, of course, the people there, you have to give them time to mature into it. I find it's very difficult when our restaurant operator try to bring the restaurant opening to the top, you know, and then I say, man, you got nowhere else to go but down on the next day. So I do believe in gradually build up. And I admire restaurant that's been around for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, yesterday I actually asked someone, said, is a stockhouse still there? They said, oh, they burned down 2 years ago. So I mean, in my mind, I still remember something that I've encountered it 20-some years ago. You know, so it was never about design. I don't remember the design at all, but I did remember the experience I had in St. Kilda. So to me, that is priceless.
Okay. Thank you. Nicholas?
I don't mind open kitchens. I have a two-pronged view on open kitchens, and I don't know how many restaurants you've worked in, Tony, but there's definitely a front of house and a back of house. And I think open kitchens definitely do a lot to break down that wall. I mean, like, you know, I'm sure you've worked at a lot of restaurants where the chefs hate the floor staff and the floor staff hate the chefs and so forth. But it is proven, and I've worked in open kitchen restaurants where there is a greater respect. There's a greater respect because the chefs are on show. Chefs always think that the floor staff are just standing around smoking cigarettes and talking up the patrons, but they're not. They're actually, sometimes they just can't get to the kitchen and pick up that meal. And chefs are then like screaming and yelling and doing what have you. So it is shown that productivity increases. The relationship between front of house and back of house definitely gets better. And chefs actually get a real chuff out of seeing people enjoy their meals. And then just like when the patron gets up and says goodbye to the waiter or the waitress, they also say goodbye to the chef. Thank you, chef. And people love that. They absolutely love it. But on the other side, we have to remember that a kitchen is still a production room. It's still making food. And I like the mystery and the illusion of patrons not fully understanding how we can pump out 300 meals in 3 hours. They still don't fully fathom how we get so many meals out. So when we are creating open kitchens, I think sight lines into the kitchen are very, very important. We've obviously got our key cooking apparatuses like the grill and the wok burner, and there's flames and so forth, and people love that stuff. But I hate looking into an open kitchen and I can see all the way through to the back, and I see all the buckets with dates on them and flour, and I see the stinky kitchen hand walking around with these big gloves on and so forth. You know, I don't want to see that. As a diner, I want to see the chef plate up, which is the real theatrical part, but I still need to maintain that illusion of how are they getting it done.
It's all about the magic, hiding some of the magic. Sven?
I'm pretty much in agreement with you. I don't really have a for and against on open kitchens. I think the one thing to look out for if you do build an open kitchen is that your staff costs are going to be higher, and you have to work that into how you cost your meals and how you run your business. It's very difficult to keep staff costs in the kitchen at the same level as you can if it's closed off. If it's closed off, you can run around, you can be a bit more frantic, you can, you know, like, it's a slightly different thing. If you're on display, then you need more people to do the same job, and that's just how it is. So you got to consider that, how that's going to affect your profitability. In Mjolnir, we both Sydney and Melbourne, we have our head chef on display. In both cases, they're large men with big beards, and they look the part for the Viking. And it's a big part of the guest experience, I think, to be able to see the chef there and do the farewell. But we don't allow full view into the kitchen. It cost me too much on my wages. And like you said, not everything that happens in there is pretty, right?
Okay, thank you. We're running out of time fairly quickly, and we could talk forever about food and beverage. But just last question. Nicholas, I'll aim this at you one first. What do you see as the future trends in the F&B space?
I think it all goes down to how much money you have. I mean, what Tony was telling us last night, that the average restaurant in New York, $10 million to fit out? I'm seeing a lot more, especially in the local areas, a lot of cafes which are having more of a minimalist approach, more natural timbers, gardens, correct lighting. I mean, I'm by no means a guru on design whatsoever, but I suppose they're the things that I'm sort of looking at the moment.
Sven?
I think, yeah. I mean, if you go back a few years, I think to see the future, you kind of got to see the past. If you go back a few years, bars is a good place to start. You know, everybody had the same beers in the fridge, and everybody had the same, salt and pepper squid on the menu, and the steak, and everybody had the same food, right? You go back only a decade or two, the key to success wasn't to stand out, it was to blend in. Just to have what the others have, do what the others did, and do it kind of at the same level so that when you came in, you could have what you wanted, right? That's changing a lot, and I think what's going to be the future of dining is individuality and to actually stand for something and do something super, super well. We're going to have restaurants, I think there already are restaurants that only have the one fucking dish, just the one dish. But they're going to nail that one dish amazingly well, and you might line up for an hour to get that dumpling, right? And I think that's where we're heading. So instead of trying to do what other people are doing and trying to copy what's done well elsewhere, it's going to be about how can I be unique? How can I be very special? And when we open a venue, I just do not care what anyone else is doing in my area or in town or anywhere else. I just want to come up with something that I feel we can dominate and do really, really well. And I think that's where restaurants and bars are heading. It's about being unique.
Okay, thank you. Tony?
Part of it, I agree. And I think clarity of offering. And I think a lot of people try to be good at everything. I think the future has to be precise, clarity. The product offering needs to be absolute solid. Being good enough is not good enough anymore, my opinion. Second is personality. We used to love the neighborhood restaurant, and we hated the neighborhood restaurant. I think the neighborhood restaurant now is making a new take because the world got smaller. So when you visit any city, you somehow get to know the neighborhood, and there's a clear representation of the neighborhood. And I think the restaurant does represent that. So I think that kind of a dining culture, product offering, is extremely representative of a neighborhood. So I think the scale got bigger, but yet the restaurant got smaller. Big restaurant. And there was time, I started designing restaurant in 1979. The restaurant were average about 200 square meter. Then eventually became in 1985, the Jiangbang Market, the restaurant became 10,000 square feet, 1,000 square meter. Then you look at everything now become bigger and bigger, multi-floor, diversity, banquet room, private dining, you name it. I think the future probably going to go back to manageable size and yet still manageable with their bottom line. I think big doesn't mean great, but knowing the proper size that works for you probably is the key. And I did mention earlier about real estate play. Real estate play is not for everyone, but if someone truly in love with what they do and wish to say, well, I want to stay here till I die, then you have no choice but owning it. And there are people like that. And Danny Meyer, for one, his restaurant's been around for 35 years. Now, can he be around for another 40? If he doesn't own the real estate, there's no chance. Of course, he will relocate, right? So the reality of it is the future probably will weed out those that don't belong in the restaurant business and allow more space for people who are actually very good at it, and for those people who's really passionate about it. So I think that's the future.
Okay. We're out of time, but we might take maybe one or two questions from the floor.
Hi guys, I'd just like to know actually what your favourite meal and favourite restaurant is.
I don't think I actually have a favourite restaurant. I'm pretty simple when it goes out. Like, you know, I like good food, but I like all the elements to be ticked off. So if I go somewhere, and I always, every hospitality venue I've had and every organisation I've worked, and I'm sure there's quite a lot of people here in this room, but I always try to go with the Cheers mentality. I don't know if you all remember the Cheers sitcom, and the tagline was, wouldn't you like to go to a place where everybody knows your name? And I love the venue where I go in, I get a good meal, I'm recognised, hi Nick, or what have you, and I'm looked after. My needs are met, or even and they've anticipated my needs. They know what I want, and I just get a good, honest meal.
Yeah, I'm the same. I don't have a favorite restaurant anymore at all. You know, to be honest, when I think that you don't really want people to have that. You want your restaurant to be part of someone's repertoire of places where they enjoy to go, and they go for different types of occasions. You know, but I'm gonna say that if I'm gonna pick a favorite meal, it's gonna have to be bangers and mash with a pint of Guinness. Just so it's been said.
Not bad coming from a Norwegian. Tony?
You know, I do have favorite restaurant, but depends on the day of the week. Sunday night, my favorite restaurant is definitely predictable. Then, of course, on the Friday night is another type. So you sort of have a handful of restaurants that you like to go, and that give you certain comfort. Whether it's a comfort food, but to me, it's a comfort feeling. And I do like to go to those restaurants. And I think nowadays, I mean, I can only refer to New York. It's very difficult to go back to the same restaurant 2 or 3 times because there's so many restaurants to try it. But I can tell you there are restaurants I go there once and that'll be it. Yeah. And those are the restaurants, they are not my favorite.
Okay, we are out of time, unfortunately. We could be here forever. But please thank our panel, Tony, Sven, and Nicholas.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.